Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I am delighted to be joined by Sébastien Levert, who will be talking to you about From SharePoint to Office 365 Development, the path to your new playground. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar. On Twitter, our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC17. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Sébastien in the questions window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Sébastien Levert. Hello, Sébastien.
Hey, how are you? So thanks everyone for joining that webinar. I'm super excited to be here today to be able to talk to you about something that is very close to my heart, which is how do you transition from a SharePoint development perspective to a more of an Office 365 development perspective. So we've all been there. We're all SharePoint developers, or at least we want to pretend to develop on the SharePoint platform. And now there's all those cool things that are happening in the SharePoint environments, in the Office 365 environments, and we're actually curious to know what's going on, what is happening, and how do I take my current skills that I built for the last couple of years to the next level. So the topic of today's webinar is on that. How do you get those skills to make them available in an Office 365 context? So before we start, a bit of introduction. My name is Seb, or Sébastien. I am a product evangelist and partner manager at Valo Intranet. So we build Internet-in-a-box solutions on top of SharePoint and Office 365. And what I'm showing you today is how we did transition from a classic SharePoint approach in some of our products or in some of our services to a more Office 365 approach to all of those different concepts. I am also an Office development MVP. I've been doing SharePoint work for the last 12 years, mainly on the development side. So that's what I am going to show you today. So we have a pretty simple agenda today. So first, I'd like to cover one thing which is called the mindset. How do we understand how do we change our mindset to start thinking more differently in terms of the solutions we're going to build, we're going to sketch. How do we change our mindset to fit that new Office 365 development path? Then I'm going to talk about technology. What does it mean for you? What are the new opportunities for you to integrate in the overall Office 365 suite and not only into SharePoint, which is super important. You want to be able to leverage all the tools that are available in Office 365. And one of the cool things that are happening now, that all the different tools that you'll see today are pretty much all available also in an on-prem scenario. So you will see those today. Then I want to talk to you about your roadmap. Not my roadmap, but your roadmap. How do you get from where you are today to where you want to be in the future? What are the different steps that needs to happen to bring you to be up to par or up to speed with that new Office 365 development patterns? So that is our roadmap. And then what are your next steps? How can you get some information, resources, on everything around the platform? So it is super important for me that you have access to all the resources. All the code that I'm going to show you today are examples available on different official Microsoft GitHub repositories or on my own GitHub repos. You'll get all the links at the end of the session. And as we said, this recording will be made available, so you'll be able to get back to it to dive a bit deeper in all the different aspects of that webinar. So first, the mindset. The mindset is super important. You need to pass through a certain amount of steps to get to a point where you'll be comfortable with your new way of thinking. First of all, what you need to do is to start becoming a web developer. So SharePoint, what is SharePoint? So SharePoint is a web platform. It is a technology that sits on a web server that leverages server-side code and client-side code like any other web platform. So consider it like this. Stop considering it like a SharePoint environment, but consider it like a web dev. It's easier that way because you'll be able to leverage all the ecosystem that exists around client-side technologies because you consider it to be a web platform. You will also start to think about cross-platform and multiple devices. Microsoft is very happy to tell you in every conference that they are cloud first, mobile first. Well, if we want to go in Office 365, we can get the cloud first. But if we think about mobile first, it's going to help you also in terms of shaping on how you would shape your different solutions. By mobile, I mean tablets, I mean cell phones, smartphones, desktop, huge screen like the Surface Hub, or smaller screen like the Surface Studio. You want to start leveraging those tools or those devices as your surfaces where you will integrate yourself. Always keep in mind that client-side technologies is the future of web dev. If you're looking at the web dev scene currently, what are the different things that are going on? First of all, it's all the frameworks, all the different frameworks that exist that are out there. Since the beginning of this session, at least 3 new frameworks were invented at some point in GitHub. Even the SharePoint team is now pushing new frameworks to us. The client-side technologies is where it's happening. This is where you will start to learn and start coding for getting things done. And it works extremely nicely with the SharePoint and Office 365 development scene. So keep that in mind. It is super important. Also, leverage APIs instead of direct connections to data. If you're a web developer, you don't want to learn about a new technology, Python or PHP or .NET or Node.js or whatsoever. You just want to use a URL to get to your data, use some ways of getting that data using AJAX calls, and that's it. Let's start to think about that. So if you're still doing SharePoint on premises, even though if it's not in the cloud, start leveraging its APIs. When you will move to the cloud, if you move at some point, and you don't have to move to benefit from all the technologies I'll show you today, you'll be fully compatible with the Office 365 platform. So that is absolutely a very, very cool thing. Pretend to live in the cloud. That means that every single solution you build, you have to have the feeling that you live in the cloud. Microsoft learns a lot from the cloud. So the SharePoint 2016 or the different feature pack that were delivered to SharePoint on premises in 2016 were all stuff that was brought from the cloud to the on-premises environments. So if you pretend to live in the cloud, you will make choices that will make you available in the cloud, but also available on premises the exact same way. So it is super important. It's going to force you to think differently, to think in a more microservices way instead of having long processes and huge .NET code and all of that. You'll think differently in how you build your solution and how you architect your solution also. Be up for the challenge by developing cloud first for any solution. And that ties nicely with the 4th bullet. Use Office 365 as your main environment. So a bit of a story for me. I was working last year for a big services company where we're doing Office 365 and SharePoint development. That was a challenge for us because we had to carry around our VMs to be able to work on premises, but also to always have access to the cloud when we're working on Office 365 project. So what we did, we actually stopped using any of our VMs. So all of our different projects were using Office 365 as our main development environment. So all the solutions we were building were all based on Office 365 and direct connections to the APIs of Office 365. The good thing about that is that all the APIs, or almost all of the APIs available in SharePoint Online, are also all available in SharePoint on-premises through the REST APIs. So by just changing the URL, and even there you could get your current URL, you have no code change to make, and that solution is also 100% compatible with on-premises. So if you do that choice to go as a cloud-first approach in terms of how you develop your solutions, it's going to help you a lot in having a more robust and more cloud-ready solution. You can also get easily an Office 365 development tenant, which is available on the dev.office.com. You just go there, you join the developer program over there, and you get access to a 25 users developer tenant where you will be able to develop all your different solutions. So that is absolutely cool. You also need to think about how you develop. Instead of doing all the requirements and having some kind of more of a waterfall approach, start to move fast. And one of the reasons why is because you want to stay on par with the newest and greatest web technologies. If you go for a project of 2 years, the framework you will use or the techniques that you will use today won't be actually relevant in 2 years. So the web is going fast, so you need to embrace that change rapidly. So you need to build smaller pieces of your applications, leveraging the best possible technology available at the moment. Don't hesitate to change and evolve with technology. Learn, read, blog, do tutorials, follow the trends, learn about what is currently cooking in the web development. I will give you some examples. 4 years ago, no one, or close to no one, were actually knowing what was AngularJS. Today, Angular is one of the most popular frameworks in the world, even in enterprise scenarios. So it means that if you haven't started looking at AngularJS 4 years ago, today the wave is the learning curve is pretty steep, because there's a lot that happened in that space. But if you're looking at it, if you're monitoring it every single day or every single week, it's going to help you a lot. Same thing for failing fast. Use a framework, use it, shape your application, and fail. We want you to fail. We want you to start failing rapidly. That's going to make you change technologies or change architecture to fit more nicely in your new picture. It's super important. And embrace agile technologies and agile methodologies. Why? Because it's going to help you to go fast. It's going to help you to change technologies very easily. It's going to help you in having a lot of new practices included in your app. So it's super important. So become a web dev, pretend to live in the cloud, and move fast. Those are the key things to change your mindset and start leveraging all the new technologies that exist in the Office 365 world. So it is super, super, super important to start thinking about that. In terms of technology, so I want to limit that webinar to be on the Office 365 space. So it means that we won't go into a ton of different technologies, but still, there's a lot to cover. So what does it mean? What does technology mean for me? Or what does it mean for you? It means that, first of all, you have plenty of new integration opportunities. So let's pretend that you're a SharePoint developer and you're used to create SharePoint solutions. That means that for the last X number of years, you were used to create new pages or new WSPs or new JavaScript files that were all sitting in a SharePoint page. Well, today, integration opportunities are more than just SharePoint pages. Or layout pages in SharePoint. Now you have opportunities all over the entire Office 365 suite that will let you get to your data or connect with some of your line of business applications where your user is actually getting productive. So the first one is the Office add-ins. The Office add-ins is an awesome set of functionality that live inside the Office client. That Office client is where your users are mainly getting productive. So they are in Word, in Excel, in Outlook, in PowerPoint, in Project. They want to get productive there, and this is where you can also leverage some of the APIs, some of the modern web techniques to deliver a nice companion app that's going to make them even more productive. So the Office add-ins enable you to have a cross-platform development. That means that the add-ins are available on Windows, they are available on the Mac, they're also available on mobile phones, so you can have add-ins in your Outlook client on iOS and Android. So your code that you are actually going to create will be available throughout all the platforms. So that is some kind of a freebie around mobile dev. You don't even need to think about cross-platform development. The Office add-ins is cross-platform by nature. You're going to be able to integrate with multiple core softwares, and you're going to use a technology that we all know, which is HTML and JavaScript. And you'll notice that HTML and JavaScript technologies will pretty much always come back in that session. You will feel that if we want to have more and more integration or more and more code running in JavaScript and HTML, because this is where the web developers are. Stop thinking in terms of SharePoint devs. Start thinking in terms of web development. So one of the examples I want to show right now is how do we integrate an Office add-in. So what I'll do, I will close that window, and I'll go here. And you see I am currently in Office 365. I'm in the Outlook client, in the Outlook web client, so the webmail of Outlook. And one of the integration opportunities is to be able to have a companion app when you create or compose a new email. So if we go back to business needs or business requirements, you can think about having predefined templates. You can have predefined connections to help desk to be able to provision knowledge base articles to support tickets or any other business need that you would see that could integrate nicely into your compose scenarios directly in Outlook. So for example, if I go here, I hit new, you see here at the bottom, we have a bunch of little icons. Those icons are all add-ins. So what's going to happen? I'm going to click on the left one, the one that has some kind of an image or a stock picture here, and we're going to have right here. Just give me a second. I'll just make sure that that is actually yeah, it's loaded and it's secured. So we'll just close that, and we'll create a new email just to make sure everything goes fine. There we go. So one of my favorite things, as I'm considered to be one of those millennials, is that I communicate with my friends using GIFs. So I'm animated GIFs. That's what I do. I love to trick my friends and to have fun with those. So one of the things I like is here I can include all those GIFs directly in my email. So let's pretend that would be a knowledge-based article or whatsoever, more productive than a GIF, but it's going to give you a very good example. So here I can go here. I can search for, let's search for a cat, for example. And this is here, everything including, this is all HTML and JavaScript that is being loaded here. So that's an iframe that is being loaded directly in your Office client. It's going to be also loaded in your full-blown Windows client, same thing for iOS, or same thing for Android. And you can just go here and hit insert GIF, and I can send the email to my account, and here's a cat. And I can send that. So that is for us a way to integrate nicely with the Office client. And you can do that in Word. You can even have access to the content of your document. Same thing for Excel, same thing for PowerPoint, same thing for Visio, same thing for Project. So it is super important that this new surface or this new integration opportunity, you need to think about it. You need to include that in your new scenarios because it's actually very, very helpful. And you don't need to live in the cloud for that. That web mail can also be an exchange on premises environment. Same thing for our clients. You don't need to have a window or an Outlook that lives in Office 365. You can have an Outlook 2013 or 2016 that will load the pane on the right, and that's it. So by thinking, if you were pretending you're in the cloud, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to come with those new solutions. So I just did that. Second integration opportunity. Well, we're all SharePoint developers. So our second integration opportunity is actually SharePoint. And SharePoint means that it's new SharePoint. It's not good old SharePoint 2010, 2013, or 2016 server-side object model. We're now talking about modern integration with SharePoint. So first of all, you have to stop right now doing any WSP. So if you're developing code on top of the SharePoint platform, please stop using WSP as your main integration platform. You need to start leveraging new and modern techniques that's going to leverage cloud approaches, but can also be integrated in an on-premises scenario. So for example, using modern integration UI hooks. So for example, you cannot today change any, well, you can, but it's not recommended to change any master page or out-of-the-box CSS files. What does it mean? It means that if you need to integrate a JavaScript file, how do you do that? You don't include that in your master page anymore. So the way you could do it is through a custom action, so a script link using a custom action. That's going to be loaded on every single page or on every single web or on every single site collection. That's going to give you new integration scenarios where you will have JavaScript running in the page and you will be able to do stuff. You will be able to act on the page. You'll be able to add a web part, or you'll be able to add a navigation component, or you'll be able to do whatever you need to do using those new, modern integration UI hooks. So that is very, very important. This is how you need to do that in Office 365 and in SharePoint on-premises. And here I'm really talking about the classic sites of SharePoint. I'm not talking about the Office 365 modern sites, as this is another technique that's going to be covered a bit later on. Second thing, you also may want to process data in the background. So at the time, we were building lots of Office SharePoint event receivers or remote event receivers that were built using .NET. Today, we now have something called the webhooks. So the webhooks are happening currently only in Office 365, but that's going to be a concept that might be brought back to the SharePoint server. That's going to help you in having a modern and cloud approach to receive events from your list. So for example, if you drop a new file in a list, what's going to happen is the webhook is going to poke one of your APIs that you would have built using any technology. You can use PHP, Python, PowerShell, Node.js, C#, any technology you want, and you just made that available somewhere in the cloud. Then your webhook is going to be called by the list, and webhook will go back and ask for what change. Then it's going to be able to act on those. So, for example, you want to add maybe to streamline the process of adding new properties based on the content of a document. So you would just drop a document in there, some APIs to understand the context of a document, change some of the properties, and save the document back in the documents library. Thing to note, everything that happens in a webhook is async. So you cannot have any synchronized event that are happening in the cloud, and that is a cloud approach. You don't want to block the user from doing anything. You don't want to block the UI from doing anything. So you would, at a later time, act on your data. So you cannot, for example, cancel an event because it is not in sync. And then the third now integration opportunity is the SharePoint Framework. So we've all learned and all heard about the SharePoint Framework, which is the new way of integrating stuff in SharePoint, especially in online scenarios. But now it's also coming back to the SharePoint server. So the next feature pack should include the SharePoint Framework, so we'll be able to use only one development tool set and tool chain to do all of those different changes. So the SharePoint Framework is a client-side framework that enables you to create web parts on top of SharePoint experiences using only client-side technology. So you don't have any servers, you don't have any anything else than TypeScript, HTML, and CSS that are in there. For now, it is limited to client-side web parts. The development preview has been announced for what they call the SharePoint Framework extensions, which covers 4 different new aspects. One is the web part to web part connection. So if you need to filter, have some kind of a master detail approach to your web part, that's going to be available. And you'll also have the extensions around field customizers. So we can relate that to an old good SharePoint concept, which was the JS links. You will have also the application customizer, which is somewhat the script link, where you can integrate a JavaScript in the context of your page and go in some specific placeholders to add a div or to add any log you want. And you will also get a comment set where you will be able to add new buttons, for example, on your toolbar on your comment bar of your document libraries, or directly in the context menu over there. So what I want to show you now is a SharePoint framework running. So I have 2 different examples to show you. So this one, I'll just make sure that it's reloading and it works. So there you go. We have here a SharePoint Framework web part that is using Angular. Don't worry about Angular. That's not the case of that. That's not the reason why I want to show you that. But here I have a very fancy web part that is actually using quite modern techniques. So here I can go here and I can create a new SharePoint site. And what it's going to create a modern theme site based on the information I'm going to provide. So here I'm going to provide ESPC webinar. No, that ESPC webinar. Then I'm going to create a site. And I will show you later what's going to create this site. So we will have a background process that's going to take that and create the site from the server side. We don't want to have that kind of approach to be all in the browser, because if you close a browser, you would lose connection, and then maybe something bad could happen. So you want to send that to a server-side object and then make that created. So I'll show you right after what it's happening. So when I create, it's going to create a modern site, and we'll come back to that once it's ready. There's also new approaches in terms of integrations that are currently interesting. And using the webhooks can give you a nice approach also to modern SharePoint. So for example, here, I'm in a modern theme site. I have a modern list right here, and I will create a new item. And I'm going to call it ESPC webinar. Well, I'll call it ESPC webinar 2 because I just created the first one. The URL will be ESPC webinar 2. I'm going to create a team, and I'm going to state it. So what's going to happen here? What's going to happen is that here it's a bit different. I'm not creating a modern theme site. I'm creating a classic subsite based on a template. So we have a bunch of templates. Those templates are available right here. So I'll just use that /template/theme. So I have that site here that represents my classic SharePoint, my classic SharePoint theme site. And then using a webhook, I'm going to go understand what was created, what's the type. Then I will use one of the nice and shiny PnP features, which is the PnP PowerShell commandlets. I'll be able to get in that site, understand the context, understand what's being provisioned. I will create a template out of that site, and then I will create a new site based on that specific template. So when I will save that, it's going to invoke a bunch of stuff, and you will see stuff happening. The cool thing in there is that it also integrates very nicely with all the citizen developers' new ways of automating and creating forms using Flow and Power Apps. So here, I actually have a flow that monitors that list, and when the item is created, then it's the flow that's going to invoke my webhook. So my API that sits in the cloud. So we'll let that go, and we'll come back to it because Flow is running pretty much every 5 minutes approximately, so it might take some time before we get there. So I will come back to that screen a bit later on. We also have integration opportunities in terms of Office 365 apps. And what is an Office 365 apps is just code happen somewhere that leverages the Office 365 APIs. One of the best Office 365 API that exists over there is called the Microsoft Graph. And that is something that if you live in the cloud, you need to start looking at that. The Microsoft Graph is an API that covers all the APIs of pretty much all technologies that exist in the Office 365 suite. So talking about Exchange, Skype, SharePoint, Azure AD, Office 365 groups. There's a bunch of them that are all going through that same API. And it is very, very important for us because it now creates a brand new world for all the developers, which means that we only have to learn one API to get to all our enterprise data. So it is super important. It is very nice also because it is entirely technology agnostic. You will use some modern techniques to authenticate, which are all available through all the different technologies, which is called OAuth and OpenID Connect. That means that if you have a developer in your organization that plays with Python or plays with PHP, you'll be able to create an Office 365 app. Even though if you write server-side code, you might need some server-side code. Same thing. It just works. It's going to be also pretty interesting because you'll be able to add that to the app launcher. The app launcher is what we call the waffle menu in Office 365. That waffle menu is a great way to provision and to showcase some of your enterprise applications directly in your Office 365 tenants and now even on your SharePoint on-premises environment. So let me show you something. I will go back here. So here I have an app. So if you look at, and I'll go back here. If you look at the URL, I'm in the local host. There's no server-side code that runs here. It's only JavaScript and HTML. So that's what we call a single-page application. That's everything. Here, if I reload it, just to make sure that my connection is private, I am automatically connected to my tenant. The way that I know that I'm connected is because right of my suite bar, and that is a custom suite bar. That's not the Office 365 one. We created a new suite bar here that enables easy access to a similar look and feel than the Office 365 suite. I have my picture. My picture shows that I am logged in because it went to my API, to my Graph API, and got the value of my picture. So I can put it right there. So that is a very cool feature because automatically authenticating through the Microsoft Graph. And one of the things that I can do in the Microsoft Graph is to get access, for example, to all my messages. So I can go here, and I can see all the messages that were sent to my own email address. And we can see the message that was sent earlier from administrator, which is my account. Here's a cat. So I can go in here and leverage that and see my wonderful GIF that was sent earlier. So that just means that by using from one side something to provision your data and your emails through the Office ad, now you can also leverage the same kind of data, but from a consumption point of view, to leverage the newly created emails directly in my inbox. So that is pretty cool. You can also do that for the files. So here you will see I have a bunch of different files that are available right in here that are all going through the Microsoft Graph using the OneDrive specific API in the Microsoft Graph to get access to my personal OneDrive, my enterprise OneDrive, and I go in a folder and I can see the content of those different files. So that is absolutely cool. Why are we doing that? It's simple. It's because we might want to have an app that runs out of SharePoint is not only integration opportunity anymore. You may want to have a more complete help desk solution that leverage conversation from Skype, emails from Exchange. You may want also to add a SharePoint site linked to every customer where you will be able to drop some files in there. So that is a great way to create some composed apps using multiple APIs or multiple sets of APIs. So that is one other great integration opportunity that exists directly. In the new tool set of the SharePoint Dev. And that way of connecting to SharePoint data, or that way of connecting to Exchange data, doesn't require the Microsoft Graph. It's a good tool to have because it's easy. You could do everything I just showed you, the regular SharePoint APIs and the regular Exchange APIs, which means that you can also get very, very easily to the point where you can create that for on-premises scenarios. So it is a very, very cool feature. I tend to start looking more at those SharePoint Framework or SharePoint directly, as those are easier to change. You have full control over your pages. You have full control over everything in there, which is for a developer, I think, to have a lot of control, but still having the same kind of background and same kind of mindset that any other web technologies that you would build for SharePoint Framework, for example. Then in terms of technology stack, what does it mean? What I use to create all of those different experiences directly in my SharePoint tenant or directly in my Office 365 tenant. So first of all, you'll have to learn right now, if it's not already done, you have to learn JavaScript, but not just JavaScript by using jQuery to do some dumb manipulations. You have to learn JavaScript, really, really, really JavaScript. Because you'll want to use the latest version of the standards, I encourage you a lot to learn TypeScript on top of JavaScript. So start by learning JavaScript to understand what the language can offer you, but then go as soon as you can to TypeScript because you're going to have a more enterprise version of JavaScript with what you would expect in terms of type checking and IntelliSense in all your different favorite IDEs. So that is super important. You will also want to start leveraging UI frameworks. React, Knockout, AngularJS, the Office UI Fabric that creates components that are looking very, very similar to what the Office Suite can deliver. That's what you saw when I showed my emails. It was feeling a lot like the Exchange or Outlook approach. It is super important to use those frameworks. And the reason why is because we're lazy. As developers, we're always lazy and we're not always the best in terms of UI. We're not designers. So use what's available out there. It's going to help you deliver quality applications in no time. Also, by going JavaScript, you're also getting access to a lot of productivity tools, which is the entire web development community that will build stuff. Webpack or Gulp or Grunt or Node Package Manager, all of that is going to be made available to you very easily by only using the JavaScript world. It's going to integrate nicely into your own workflow. And I think that's the most important thing of all of that, is that JavaScript will become a universal language to allow you to create code for the client and for the server. Which means that now you can also use Node.js in terms of coding to create your background processing, but also use JavaScript to create your mobile applications, use JavaScript to create your Windows and Mac rich client applications, and also build for the web. So by learning one language, you're now available throughout all the platforms that exist. And by that, I mean that we really can do that. It's not just something that we pretend to do. We can actually do that using the Office 365 suite. So I'll start with something that's called Electron. Electron is a framework that enables you to embed a web page or some kind of a web page in a Windows application. And that means that all your code will be a web page using the technology you want, React, Angular, plain JavaScript code, whatever you want, and integrate that directly into your own application. So for example, here, I have an app. So it's a real app. You can see I can resize it. It's a Windows app, very, very simple one. I'm being asked to log into Office 365. So it understands I'm not logged in. Can go here. It's going to prompt for my username and password. So I'm going to put in my password here. I'm going to sign in. And then it says, welcome administrator. So now I'm connected. And all that code is all JavaScript, CSS, and HTML that drive these experiences. So I can go here. I can see all my files, the exact same files that I was able to see earlier. Same thing for example, here. Those are all my different groups that exist in my Office 365 that are public. I can go here and see all the people that exist in my tenant. That is a very nice way to integrate. So here, it's more of a listing of all the information available in my Office 365 tenant. But think further, you can integrate with all the data, your Dynamics data, your CRM data, your enterprise data, Office 365, and all of that. So it is a good way to create new applications, new experiences for your field agents, for your support people, for your information workers, for anyone that work in the Office 365 environment. Same thing for mobile. So here, I have an Android app that is right here. And you can see I have Ionic Files application right there. If I click on it, it's going to open an app that is 100% native. So I have a button very similar to what I had earlier, which is sign in with Office 365. So if I sign in, it's going to request so I can go here, admin, and add my email. I'll just drag that in another window so you don't see my email because it's a mobile application. So you will see all the last letters I'm using. So I just clicked on sign in. Then I have the exact same thing. Here I have my files from OneDrive. So using Ionic, it actually gets me to a full modern SharePoint connections or OneDrive connections or Exchange connections directly on my mobile phone. But all of that using JavaScript, TypeScript, and HTML. Again, it is a very, very powerful tool for you to start learning, and that's going to be a very, very, very easy way to get to the next level in terms of SharePoint to Office 365 developer. So you will also have to learn Node.js. That's going to be one of your main tools as you will go back to the console. There's a lot of things that are running on the console. So if I can show you very quickly, here I have a bunch of consoles that are running currently that are serving my Office add-in, that are serving my Office Hub, the Office 365 app, one with the SharePoint Framework, and one with Electron right here. So all of those are all based on Node.js. So it's an important technology that you will have to learn through your journey to Office 365 development. You'll also need to learn .NET. So you probably already know .NET, but that's going to be a very, very good way for you to take the skills you already have and now build them more in terms of APIs. Build APIs instead of server-side pages. That's going to help you a lot, and you're going to be able to leverage those using your JavaScript code directly using the REST APIs. That's going to be, for you, a very good way to do that. You're also going to want to start leveraging Azure. Azure will give you lots of tools, one being the app service where you'll be able to host HTML or web pages, but also web APIs, and also something called Azure Functions. I'll come back to that in a second. You will want to use the CDN over there to be able to distribute your assets and be geographically located so it's going to be super, super fast to get your JavaScript and CSS files. You want to use Azure AD to be able to get to those data to SharePoint and OneDrive for Business and Microsoft Graph. This is all secured in Azure AD. You also want to leverage the Visual Team services for automated build and release management, and also all your job process. So I was saying earlier that you need to embrace agile methodologies. Well, Visual Studio Team Services will enable you to do that very easily. Now I want to show you what was behind our magical code that was happening earlier. So first of all, let's see if that code actually worked. Well, here it did not. But here I know it did because I received an email. So if I'm reloading it, you'll see here something changed. So now it's still provisioning. So I'm actually in the provisioning process of my flow that is currently running. So it's been, it failed actually. So kind of a weird thing, the HTTP, there's something happening with that. I'll have to take a look at it, but I'll show the code that is running behind all of that. So here, I'm in something called Azure Functions. Azure Functions is a very, very simple API where you only have one endpoint. That endpoint can be in any technology. And here, what is the technology being used? It's actually PowerShell. So it's cool because it creates very, very, very short and very quick way of deploying an API. That runs in a language that even your admins will be able to help you in creating. So what's happening here is that I have my Microsoft Graph API where I'm connecting to the Microsoft Graph right here. I'm creating a new PNP unified group. So that group will be actually a new way of deploying a SharePoint site, which is a modern team site. I'm just using that, and once this is done, so those are the two main queries I'm doing to the Office 365 environment. Then once this group is going back from this commandlet, I'm just creating an object here that's going to represent what I need to do or what I need to use on my client side to thank or congratulate the user that just created it or to confirm the creation of that site. Then I just outputting that result directly here. So I will reload that just for a second. I just want to show you that it actually works, as this is my last demo anyway for today. So everything is supposed to be already set up. I'll try ESPC webinar test. I'll go here ESPC webinar test, and I'll just do that. I just want to make sure that everything seems to be working. Yeah, everything seems to be working. So at some point, we're going to have logs that are going to happen. So you'll even be able to see what's coming in from an outside perspective, from a call perspective, and then at some point, this method will be called because we can see here that we have only a URL, which is /ps create modern site, and that automatically will enable you to create everything you need in terms of data. So that's a very easy way of adding new capabilities to your on-premises scenario, as it were used to create those kinds of background processing or server-side processing web APIs. So now PowerShell and Azure Functions let you do that. So we have a perfect toolkit, but what's your roadmap? What's your roadmap to actually get to your data, to get to that learning path? So here, I'm giving you two tables. I will not go into details in there. It gives you some kind of a requirement, what you were supposed to use in the classic scenarios, and now what is the modern component that's going to deliver the exact same feature set that the old SharePoint one. So for example, Act, the third one, which is Act on the list event in SharePoint, which was a SharePoint event receiver. Now it's a SharePoint webhook, and it uses any server-side technology. So you will have those two different tables for all the different classic scenarios in terms of customization that developers were used to do. And all of those are in there. So that is a good takeaway for you. So you'll be able to print those two and get them on your desk, and always go back and refer to that when you're building a new concept or a new solution that will leverage the Office 365 platform. But then what's your minimal path to awesome? How do you want to get ready to play in the Office 365 environment? First, you will learn JavaScript. It is super important. Second, you will stop developing anything server-side directly into SharePoint. If you deploy a WSP file in your SharePoint farm, you did it wrong. This is not how you will be able to get to modern SharePoint and modern Office 365 dev. You'll have to use new techniques. You'll also want to leverage all the integration opportunities, Office add-ins, modern experiences in SharePoint, and Office 365 apps. And then you will start learning stuff on Azure. Then, once you will do all of that, you'll be good to go. But in a more roadmap way to get to success, here's our full roadmap. Learn JavaScript. Then understand the tooling ecosystem that exists with JavaScript. Leverage the Microsoft Graph and all the Office 365 APIs instead of querying directly SharePoint data. Don't go into server-side object model. Use APIs to get to all your data. And then at this point, you'll be ready to create Office 365 apps and Office add-ins. Those two integration opportunities are only requiring those sets of knowledge. But then if you want to go in more into the SharePoint world, you'll learn and use the PnP provisioning engine to do any of your deployment. That is something that needs to be looked at. That's all available on GitHub on the SharePoint GitHub. Learn and use the PnP PowerShell commandlets to do any operations on SharePoint from a remote perspective, or from a deployment perspective, or from an admin perspective. Super important. You will learn and use the JavaScript injections using the script link and the custom actions. You will learn CSUB in terms of JavaScript, in terms of C#. You will have to learn CSUB to build some APIs that will leverage your SharePoint data. You will also develop all your SharePoint code outside of SharePoint. And at this point, you will be fully functional to embrace and enhance your new SharePoint experiences from the cloud, but also from on-premises perspective. So you will be able to deploy all that code in any scenario, on-prem, online. That roadmap will get you to have feature parity in terms of development tools. And finally, if you want to go to the SharePoint Framework aspects of it, you will learn TypeScript. You will learn the SharePoint Framework. So you'll have to learn React, Webpack, the Office UI Fabric, and then you will start to play and use the Microsoft Graph. Because this is now getting included in the SharePoint Framework APIs. So you'll be able to query the Microsoft Graph directly from the SharePoint Framework, and then you'll be able to create new experiences using the SharePoint Framework and SharePoint Online, but also using the SharePoint Framework and SharePoint on-premises when Feature Pack 2 of SharePoint will be delivered on premises in SharePoint 2016, somewhere in this calendar year. So that is absolutely awesome. So what are your next steps? You have a bunch of resources right there, dev.office.com, graph.microsoft.io. You can also get to the tech community to get all the SharePoint dev questions and dev documentation. All the SharePoint docs, so all the SharePoint documentation is also available on GitHub. So if you have a question, you can go in there and log an issue or a question. All the samples I showed you today are mainly available on my own GitHub. So the last two links, so the Office Hub and the SPFX Angular POC, which is what gets you to have a fairly nice integration with the Microsoft Graph and SharePoint Framework and all of that. Also the GitHub of SharePoint, of Microsoft Graph, and the Office Dev. Share your experiences. If you want to learn more about Office 365 Dev, follow the hashtag Office 365 Dev, and hashtag Microsoft Graph to learn more about the Microsoft Graph. This is where all the people that are working on those technologies are sharing their thoughts and sharing links and samples to new technologies that they're using. Contribute on the tech community. So you can go on that link, you'll be redirected to the tech community, and it's going to help you. This is where you should ask your questions. The community is there to help. And if you have issues or have questions, log them in any of those GitHub repositories. It's going to help you to understand a bit more what's going on in the Office 365 space, and you're going to get things done thanks to that. Thanks for joining me today. I know it was a very packed session. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Sébastien Levert. You will be able to get there fairly easily. If you want, you can also put in the chat window right now some questions. I'll be able to take some of them. And thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Sébastien. That's super. The first question we have here, Sébastien, is will the slides be available? So can you send them to me and I'll send them to everyone that attended today?
Absolutely. I'll make sure everything is made available. And you'll get all the references and links also in there. So you'll have everything in one single document.
Super. I'll just run through some questions here quickly. When will the SharePoint Framework be made available on-premise?
That's a very good one. So the SharePoint Framework has no confirmed date. It's going to be before the end of calendar year 2017. So expect that to be probably after Ignite, but before Christmas. So it's going to be a nice Christmas present for everyone.
Great. Next question, how do you replace the timer jobs for example, a SharePoint list as the UI for database tables? Ideal candidate is timer job. How do you replace it?
That is a very good question. I'll even show you very rapidly. It's even logically, it should be in there. There you go. So run schedule actions on SharePoint. We're using SharePoint Timer Job at the time. Now you can use Azure Web Job that runs somewhere in Azure, or a scheduled job that runs on Windows, on premises, or using the Azure function. Azure function, you can also have a function that runs on a scheduled time. So you can go to your SharePoint, do your stuff, and then the Azure function ends. So this is how today we're implementing SharePoint Timer Jobs in the cloud or on premises.
Great. Next question, are webhooks available for on-prem yet, 2016 or 2013?
No. I don't know if there's any plan to bring that to the server version of SharePoint. It's currently mainly available in online. But what I would suggest, if you want to go the webhook path, would be to create a remote event receiver inside SharePoint. That its only thing that's going to do, it's going to just poke your webhook. So I like to replace the functionality inside your own organization by using remote event receiver that pokes another URL for that. That's going to make that webhook fully compliant for on-prem and online, and the only on-premises artifact that will exist will be the very, very simple remote event receiver that's going to exist there. So that's a way you can do it.
Okay, great. Next question, should we start developing using JavaScript or TypeScript?
Today, I would start learning JavaScript, but as soon as you're comfortable with JavaScript, move very rapidly to TypeScript. This is where the Angular team is all building is still in TypeScript. SharePoint Framework team, same thing. It's a much more robust version of JavaScript, even though it transpiles to JavaScript. So everything you do in TypeScript actually finishes in a JavaScript file. But at least you get IntelliSense, awesome integration with all of the frameworks, and it's type safe, which is not the case from JavaScript. So for me, start JavaScript, but as soon as you can, go TypeScript.
Okay. Next question. I just have to, they're coming in fast and thick, Sébastien. How to estimate the cost when we migrate event receiver and timer job to an Azure function or web job?
Oh, there's a, I don't have it handy. I'll make sure that I do put that in my slides when I'll be able to send you. There's a cost calculator for Azure Functions. And keep in mind that Azure Function is only built on demand. So it's only when an Azure function runs that it's actually built. So if it's sitting there, nothing is talking to the Azure function, there's no cost involved. Which means that to go from a web app to an Azure function for some of those scenarios, you it's 1,000% cheaper to go with Azure Function usually, if not a million times cheaper to go with Azure Function. So people that were used to add like bills of 50, 60, 70 bucks per month in terms of Azure Web App can be like 25 cents in Azure Function depending on your scenario. So it's a lot cheaper to go there than to go Azure Web App. It's a bit more expensive than to use SharePoint, as SharePoint was already it was only on your server, so you had no cost involved in there, but it's really, really, really not expensive to go Azure Function. I'll put the link in the slide so you'll add the reference.
Okay, and the last question I'm just going to do here because we're pretty much out of time. Generally, JavaScript is required to be learned before we start building applications for SharePoint Online, but is Node.js or any other framework compulsory for Office 365 apps?
Nope. You could go only JavaScript. I would learn Node.js, as you will need Node.js for task runners and some kind of compilation of your JavaScript or minification of your JavaScript and all of that. You will not actually learn Node.js in terms of complex framework, but you will learn some bits and pieces that you're going to integrate in your development tool chain. So it's not going to be mandatory, but at some point you will have to use Node.js. It's a good thing, as now pretty much all the tools at Microsoft are in the background using some part of Node.js.
Okay, brilliant. Sébastien, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you giving up your time today for this webinar. Very much appreciated on behalf of the community.
You're welcome, guys. It was a pleasure to be here in a sunny day in Montreal. So it's fun to have a sunny day. It's fun. It makes me happy today.
Great. Thank you so much, Sébastien. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day also.
Okay, that is it. Join us for our next webinar with Matt Berg on Microsoft Teams. This will be happening on Wednesday, June 7, 2017 at 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. CEST. That is it for now. A big thank you again to our webinar presenter, Sébastien Levert. Thank you for attending and hope you have a great day. Goodbye.